Hong Kong court sentences speech therapist to 19 months in prison over seditious children's books. A Hong Kong police press conference on July 22nd, 2021 displays images of the children's books deemed seditious. CNN. A Hong Kong court on Saturday sentenced five speech therapists to 19 months in prison over children's books deemed to be seditious in a case that rights defenders say marks the major blow to free speech amid a tightening of civil liberties in the Chinese territory. On Wednesday, Lori Lai, Melody Young, Sydney Ng, Samuel Chan, and Marco Fong are found guilty of conspiracy to print, publish, distribute, display, and/or reproduce seditious publications. Judge W.K. Kwon called the defendant's actions a brainwashing exercise with a view to guiding the very young children to accept their views and values. Beijing has no sovereignty over Hong Kong. Young said in court on Saturday that her only regret was that she had not published the more picture books before her arrest, according to court documents. The charges center around the set of books telling the stories of the village of sheep resisting a pack of wolves invading their home, a storyline that the government prosecutors alleged was meant to provoke contempt of the local government and China's central government in Beijing. In one book, the wolves tries to take over a village and eat the sheep. In another, 12 sheep are forced to leave their village after being targeted by wolves, which the court believed alluded the cases to the cases where 12 Hong Kong activists attempted to flee the city to Taiwan as fugitives, but are intercepted by Chinese law enforcement. In a ruling Wednesday, a Hong Kong district court judge sided within the prosecution, expressing his view that the images had a correlation to event in city and finding that the authors had the intention to bring into hatred or contempt to or to excite disaffection against the local and the central government or both by identifying the People's Republic of China government as the oops. The children will be led into belief that the PRC government is coming to Hong Kong with the wicked intention of taking away their home and ruling their happy life with no right to do so at all. The judge Kwok Wai Kin wrote in a 67-page document outlining his thinking on the verdict. The, the publishers of the books clearly refuse to recognize that China has resumed exercising sovereignty over Hong Kong. Kwok wrote in his decision, referring to the transfer of Hong Kong, a former British colony, to Chinese rule in 1997. The case has become a proxy for looming questions about the limits of freedom of expression in the city, coming amid a larger crackdown on civil liberties as part of Beijing's response to wide-scale, month-long anti-government protests in 2019. Those protests, which are sparked in response to the proposed bill, could send Hong Kongers to, if tried for crimes across the border, transformed into the larger pro-democracy movement that was also linked to popular concern about Beijing's growing influence in the semi-autonomous city. The defense for the execute uh, the defense for the accused, who are all executive council members of the now defunct General Union of the Hong Kong Speech Therapists had argued that the charges leveled against them are unconstitutional, given that they were inconsistent with their freedoms of expression protested under Hong Kong law. But Kwok, who is also one of the small cohort of judges handpicked by the city's leader to hear cases related to the national security, struck down that challenge, saying instead that the limited restrictions on freedom of expression were necessary for the protection of national security and the public order. In a document outlining reasons for the guilty verdict, Kwok disputed that the books were merely fabled, promoting universal values. Another argument raised by the defense, pointing to a foreword in one of the books that references and the anti-restoration movement in 2019 and the one country two systems mechanism governing Hong Kong's relationship with the mainland. The case was thrown into the public eye following their arrest, when police accused the group in a tweet of sugarcoating protesters' unlawful act and glorifying fugitives fleeing, with officials raising specific concerns given that the target audience were children. Beijing and local leaders have sought to encourage national pride among Hong Kong youth, including by bolstering national education in local curricula. The verdict has been met with outcry from rights defenders. Human Rights Watch, in a statement, accused the Hong Kong government of using the very broad sedition law to penalize the minor speech offenses. Hong Kong people used to read about the observed prosecution of people in mainland China for writing political allegories. But this is now happening in Hong Kong, said Maya Wang, senior China researcher at Human Rights Watch, in a statement. Hong Kong authorities should reverse this dramatic decline in freedoms and quash the convictions of the five children's book authors. In July, the United Nations Human Rights Committee also called on Hong Kong to repeal its colonial era sedition law, saying it was concerned about its use to limit citizens' legitimate right to freedom of speech. In a reply, the government said the use of the law was not meant to silence expression of any opinion that is only genuine criticism against the government based on the objective fact. The law, part of the 1938 Crimes Ordinance, unused for decades, has been revived alongside Beijing's introduction of national security law to Hong Kong in 2020, which targets secession, subversion, collusion with foreign forces, and terrorist activities within a maximum sentence of life in prison. Last year, a court ruled out part of the original sedition law, which references that the monarchy could be converted to mean references to the central government or the Hong Kong government. A conviction carries a maximum 2-year sentence. Other recent cases have included the sentencing of the 75-year-old activist to 9 months in jail for planning to protest against the Beijing Winter Olympics earlier this year. Last month, the two men were arrested under suspicion of violating the law in connection with the Facebook group they are saying to have managed.